I'm Kevin Davis. This is the Catholic Family Podcast. And first of all, I'd like to wish everyone a very happy and blessed Easter season. Of course, today recording this or going live the day after Easter. So that was kind of what was on my mind, of course, kind of, enjoying that season and the risen Lord and appreciating our faith, which I will continue to do. But I, as everyone else around the world, was hit with stunning news. Stunning in a way. We all knew that Pope Francis. I will call him Pope Francis. Everyone probably knows my position by now. That's what the world knows him as. Jorge Bergoglio, whatever you want to call him, passed away today, this morning, from, I don't know what it was officially, lung disease of some sort. He had been judgment. I'm joined by Mario of Novus Watch and Louis Verrecchio to discuss this man, this supposed pope, and to kind of talk about who he was and maybe a little bit about what to expect going forward, and also to make sure we get the point across that he was not the only problem of the Novus Ordo Church, that he was a kind of the fruit of what has been going on for the last 60 years. So thank you to everyone for joining us. Everyone in the comment section, we'd love if you want to, join us, have your questions. Let us know where you're viewing from. What are your thoughts on Jorge Bergoglio? What do you think is his most insane heresy, I suppose? Whatever you guys want to chat, let us know in the comment section. Mario, I guess I'll start with you. And maybe before we get the opinions of Bergoglio, Francis as a whole, do you think it's appropriate to talk about this the day that he died? I mean, that I've seen a lot of comments about that. It's like, no, it's not appropriate. I mean, what do you think on that?
No, I think there's nothing wrong with it, because we talk about him when he's alive. We talk about him when he's deceased. We've spoken before about whether it's permissible ever to pray for somebody's death. That was a few weeks ago. I put up a post on novusordowatch.org regarding that, based on, of course, the pre-Vatican II Catholic moral theology. And I really don't see the problem about, assessing his pontificate, his so-called pontificate, and reviewing everything and just, going over the damage that he caused for the last 12, just over 12 years. I really don't see the problem.
That's good, because we're here doing it. So anyone who's wondering, I have seen that, and I'm really curious to get your opinions about how everyone on Twitter seems to think that there's this hope that it could be a conservative pope coming next. I have my doubts about that, but Louis, I guess I'll start with you about what are your just first impressions of what just happened? I mean, you saw the news. What's your feeling? I mean, what was your first thought when you saw that?
I don't want to go right out of the gate with a conspiracy theory. However, I am struck by the PR value of everything attached to the Bergoglian reign, right? So you remember the very first day after his elevation to the folding chair in St. Peter's, not the chair of Peter, but whatever chair he occupied there. We were treated to the visual impact of him walking into the hotel where he spent the night during the conclave to pay his bill in person. You had to make sure that the media was there. And that was the beginning of the Humble Pope campaign. And it lasted throughout the duration of this reign of terror. And it ended with one day before the beautiful photo op of him riding in the back of the Pope-mobile for the last time, despite his weakness and his illness, because he's humble. He was out there to give his blessing to the people. Now, maybe it was all, perfectly, this is all in God's hands. And he absolutely, picked that point in time for him to die right after that wonderful PR opportunity. But I'm struck by that. And I think that it's only a matter of time before we start to hear the Santo Subito, raining out from the crowds, because clearly this man was a saint. But so those were my first thoughts. I found it just kind of almost too good to be true from a public relations standpoint and that Vatican PR machine that's so good at creating optics for this.
That's interesting, right after Easter and whatnot too. It is such a strange time, and the fact that he almost died and stayed around for a bit, met JD Vance yesterday, and then dies suddenly. It is all very kind of strange. That was kind of my thought. I was just kind of surprised. I mean, I'm about to fly to the U.S. I'm like, okay, if this is going to happen, I can get to the U.S. I can prepare a little bit. But no, of course, it's right in the middle of Holy Week and flying to America. But Mario, before I get Mario's first thoughts on what happened, I have to give Mario a shout out, because Mario, as people might expect, back in 2013 was pretty wise in his commentary. There it is.
Oh,
look at the date, guys. April 13th. Prediction: Francis will eventually be dubbed the Chaos Pope, and I think that goes with what Louis just said too. I think that is that's about right. So Mario, what was your? Yeah, you saw the news. What was your immediate impression?
My first thought was probably, oh, I got to get to work. Yes, that was, I mean, we all knew it was going to happen at some point, but you just don't know. Is it going to be soon? Is it still going to drag on for another 6 months or whatever? Because Bergoglio had been pretty successful in defying the odds over the years. And I think that the people who were speculating that, in spite of all this talk about convalescence on Francis's part, when they released him from the hospital, which seemed kind of odd, because at first they were, they're making no predictions and all this stuff. And all of a sudden, oh, by the way, we're going to release him tomorrow. Some people were speculating that they were releasing him to die, not to recover. But they didn't want to have, supposed Pope to die in hospital. They wanted him to die at the Vatican. So, but that was one of those things you just couldn't verify. So you're just like, well, is it?
Well, and how weird was that? The whole time he was ill. Like the news updates they kept giving were so strange, weren't they? Like he's on a ventilator, but he slept well and he's eating and he's rested. It was really strange. Like the whole. So there are many people, I'm sure you guys saw him on Twitter, who are like, oh yeah, he actually died and they're just pretending he's alive. And after a couple of weeks, I was starting to think, yeah, this is pretty strange. And then of course he appeared and he was alive. But back to the PR, it was so strange, wasn't it? The whole last few weeks were really, really bizarre, and really led down many rabbit holes, I think, of people wondering what on earth was going on. But I guess now we know. Now he's passed on.
And some were thinking that, oh, it's not really Francis. When he came, when he got back to the Vatican, and then he showed up at St. Peter's Basilica, somewhere saying, no, that's not really Francis. But yes, it was. There was. I had no doubt about that. And people have to understand, you can't compare Francis at age 88 with Francis at age 77 or whatever it was when he was still, just came out on the balcony of St. Peter's when he was elected. And especially I don't know enough about medicine, but doctors, nurses will be able to tell you how much people can change in terms of their external appearance in the face and the nose, especially, I hear, and just because he doesn't look exactly the way he did when he first stepped out on the balcony doesn't mean it's not him. So people,
I think one of the reasons why people are so drawn to conspiracy theories around Francis is because everything coming out of the Vatican, obviously I'm exaggerating, but many things coming out of the Vatican are flat out fake. You're talking about the reports coming out of the Vatican when Francis was convalescing. My thought at that point was he's actually in home hospice is really what was going on. But despite his grave condition, they came out with this a couple weeks ago, a catechesis written by the Holy Father. Nonsense. The man can barely speak. He can't lift his hands. What's he sitting there typing one letter at a time? This 400-word No, he didn't produce that. It's fake. Almost everything coming out of there is fake. It's a PR creation. So, of course, people, gravitated towards the idea that, well, maybe the guy's dead. You can't blame them.
Yeah.
I think a large dose of healthy skepticism is in order when something's being reported from Rome today.
Well, what wasn't it? What was it Hitler said about tell a big enough lie and people will believe it, or tell it often enough and people and I think I wonder if it's something that they haven't quite caught up with the idea that social media has kind of broken that. The news and the way of relaying information is no longer back in the 1960s or even the 2000s. It has changed, and the way people view news and what is going on is much more informed. That doesn't mean it's always well informed, but it's much different, and it seems like the Vatican just hasn't figured that out. I think it's pretty interesting. So they're just as you say, just throwing out garbage, just assuming people aren't going to notice. I wonder, like, why didn't they just not say anything? If I would just be like, just go silent, because then make people wonder. I mean, I don't really understand why there's like lie after lie that were really pretty clear. It's really bizarre, and maybe they had an intern of the Vatican running the X account, I suppose. But even the Vatican having an X account is kind of bizarre, in my opinion. But I guess, we all have to get our messages out some way.
Yeah, of course, that was not Bergoglio sitting at the computers sending tweets.
Right.
That was just the Bergoglio account. And I don't know exactly. I think for the most part, it was little excerpts from his speeches and his documents and stuff. And then they were translated into various languages, and they had different accounts. They have different accounts for the different languages, and then it all gets sent out at the same time, I think.
Yeah. So Louis, I'll ask you first. So let's go 50 years from now, and let's say, God willing, we have a true pope. 50 years, I certainly hope we do. What do you think is going to be the immediate thought of Bergoglio? What are people going to think of him when they look back on his name? And obviously, as an anti-pope, what's the basis of that history? What are people going to think of when they see his name?
His enduring legacy is going to be whether looking back from the vantage point of a true pope reigning over the true church and giving an historical account of Bergoglio, or whether the false church is going to continue, and we're going to look back from that perspective. The appraisal of his pontificate is going to be the same. He was, up to this point in history, the most passionate implementer of Vatican Council II. He was so fully dedicated to that mission, more so than the men that came before him. All of them spoke about that being a crucial part of their ministry, and it's going to be the driving force of their pontificates, is to implement, this great gift of the Holy Ghost to the church, the Second Vatican Council. But Bergoglio was head and shoulders above the entire crowd when it came to being truly faithful to the message of Vatican II. He pushed that envelope further and faster and harder than anybody before him. And that'll be pretty much the defining characteristic of his so-called reign.
I think that's really important that you say that, because I think that's something I want to talk about maybe later, about how important that is to remember, that even if a conservative pope is elected, that there's still the fruits of Vatican II, which is the heart of this entire issue. And I hope that people realize that, and anyone watching this who still has their doubts about that, go and read Novus Ordo Watch, go and read akacatholic.com, because this is really information from the church. So you can look back at what the church actually taught before Vatican II and just say, hey, look, here, compare them. And you can find those definitely at both of those websites, Novus Ordo Watch and akacatholic.com. Also, everyone who's watching, please like, share, comment, subscribe, all of that stuff. It does actually help to get people to view right now. So as we're live, if you like it and comment, we will get more eyes on it, which I think is obviously important to trying to get truth out about the man who just died.
Kevin, I have a question for Louis. With what you just said about how perfect it was with the, him writing in the Pope Mobile one last time and all that. Did you see Cardinal Dolan's comment on Francis' death?
I did not. No.
Oh, that's funny, because it's almost sounded like you did, because he said that you can't choreograph these things, but if it had been choreographed, you could not have choreographed it any better.
Interesting.
So,
yeah.
Yes. In fact, you can almost juxtapose those two balcony pictures. What was it, March 13th, 2013, when he was elected, and then Easter Sunday, April 20th, 2025, with his last public appearance. And they're both balcony pictures. And, you know, the beginning and the end of the reign of terror and error. And of course, though, it is true that there was still the Pope Mobile ride. That was the last public appearance, but that was right after the balcony, I think. Yesterday. Easter Sunday.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It is kind of scripted, but isn't that, it's such an interesting thing with him that he did have this, as Louis said, he had this whole image of being humble and the Pope of the people. But then you would get these glimpses, right? These glimpses of, you can just Google angry Francis, and there's just sometimes you could see that slipping through the cracks, you know, of really being looking pretty nasty. Now maybe he just has that kind of a face. I don't know, but it is kind of an interesting thing. I do wonder what was the book, not the Dictator Pope. What was that called? A book came out about him probably 10 years already, about really kind of about the depth of how he was as a bishop in Argentina. I don't remember what it was called.
Dictator Pope.
No, it's not or maybe it was it the Dictator Pope? Maybe it was. But anyway, pretty much this book really labeled him as being this foul-mouthed, awful person, and you kind of could see that slipping through the cracks every now and then. But in the end, it doesn't matter as much as his theology.
Is mentioned in it. Have you heard of that? The Kolvenbach report on Bergoglio. So Hans-Peter Kolvenbach, or was it Peter Hans? I'm not sure now. Kolvenbach was the superior of the Jesuits from, I'm not sure now, when was that? I think until 2008. Any case, for quite a while. And when Bergoglio was in the running, so to speak, for being made bishop in 1992, Kolvenbach put together this report, this dossier, and as far as I know, sent it to the Vatican and said, please don't make him a bishop. Here is a report on what we know about him in the Jesuit order. This man is not fit to be a bishop. And what happened is that as soon as, so then of course that fell on deaf ears, and John Paul II made him a bishop anyway. And then once Francis was elected Novus Ordo Pope in 2013, that report was immediately removed from wherever it had been available. So ever since then, interested people have been looking for that Kolvenbach report to just get their hands on it. And even Henry Cyr, the author of The Dictator Pope, wasn't able to get a copy, but he was able to speak to interview someone who had seen it. And that's why there is a little bit of information from the Kolvenbach report in The Dictator Pope.
Interesting.
Yes. And I'm wondering, now that Francis is dead, if that Kolvenbach report might perhaps mysteriously reappear.
I would be surprised.
Yeah.
Or they'll canonize him. They'll canonize him next year, right? That's more likely because he is fruit of Vatican II, so he has to be a saint. That would
derail his canonization.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess it doesn't matter anymore in the new church. They got Paul VI.
Yeah.
Well, what is the criteria for canonization in the conciliar church? I mean, I answered my question by saying conciliar church. It's service to the conciliar revolution.
Yeah.
And this guy served as faithfully and as passionately as anybody in history to this point. Now, I say to this point because I suspect, and we're going to get to what we think about the next guy, but my suspicion is the next guy, barring a miracle, please God, is going to be Bergoglio on steroids. And I think that man is going to, beat a warpath, probably a little bit more impressively than Bergoglio did.
And do you have a particular individual in mind there?
Well, my first thought was when they started these rosary assemblies in St. Peter's Square for Francis's health, the first person they chose to lead the rosary was Cardinal Parolin, who's a career diplomat. He has no pastoral experience at all, as far as I know. And I think the reason why he was chosen, it had nothing so much to do with his rank. I think it was to introduce him to the world as a pastor, as a potential pope who could fill the humble shoes of Francis. So if I had to pick a guy that's going to be the one, I'd say it's probably Parolin. But that aside, I'm of the conviction that that man's already been chosen. We just don't know who he is yet.
Okay.
And I don't mean by the Holy Ghost either.
Mm-hmm.
That's my guess.
I would say,
and I saw it somewhere, maybe it was on Twitter, that they said that there's not a team, but a large percentage of the cardinals have never met, and 80% of the cardinals have been put into place by Bergoglio. And it's just an interesting thing that but obviously they don't have to meet to be able to talk these things through. I mean, maybe they have a WhatsApp group with all the modern cardinals, I don't know, who are discussing these things. But it is an interesting thing that they hadn't gotten together. I don't know if that's normal or not, but it seems interesting that they wouldn't have some sort of I don't know, I guess it's not a council, but I mean, is it normal that they never get together and meet? Actually, I don't know.
But you know how it came about that they haven't had that? It was at Bergoglio's, it was his decision not to have. Typically, they would occasionally have meetings at which all cardinals are either present or at least invited. But Bergoglio stopped doing that after Amoris Laetitia, reportedly because he was afraid he's going to have a mess on his hands. He didn't want to give Cardinal Burke, for example, an opportunity to filially correct him. But I think Louis probably would have something to say on that. Remember that whole thing with the whatever it was called, the formal act of correction? Cardinal Burke had said something like, "There's a tradition in the church of formal correction of the Roman pontiff." No, there isn't. I mean, have you ever heard of that, Louis?
No. And evidently, yeah. I wonder now, though, I had been thinking about that. If now Cardinal Burke will feel emboldened, and why not do it now? If he has any sincerity whatsoever in his person, now would be the time. Because prior to Francis's death, he could at least make the excuse, well, it's the Holy Father, and maybe it's not prudent, and I could create some sort of issues with the reigning Pope. That excuse is gone now. We're in this period of time where the chair is well and truly empty. Everybody knows that, although we look at it in different ways. We're all on the chair is empty page. The time now, if you have any sincerity at all whatsoever in your heart, Cardinal Burke, now would be the time. Issue that formal correction for the benefit of those who have been deceived to this point. There's no reason not to do it. None. There was really a very poor reason not to do it before, but now there's none.
And I'd like you real quick. I want to show a comment real quick, but then Louis, I'd like to ask you a little bit about Amoris Laetitia, because I think we need to clarify a little bit some of the things that he actually did. And again, we talk about him being kind of a nasty guy, but in the end, that doesn't really matter. What matters is the things he actually taught. And Amoris Laetitia is a clear one, which I know you feel very strongly about. But real quickly, this is interesting. Cantate Domino, good name, by the way. If we get Bergoglio 2.0, I speculate that this means the chastisement is almost over. If we get a Hegelian swing to the right, it ain't done yet. And I think that's a really interesting point. I think that's kind of my hopeful take on it, is that they're going to elect a Bergoglio 2.0, and you're going to have your conservative Novus Ordites say, nope, I'm not doing 20 more years of this, especially if it's someone young like Tagle or someone who I've kind of thought for a long time it could be him. And someone, a fruitcake, which I don't think that's not absurd. I think that could totally happen. I think that could actually be a step that people say, no, okay, we cannot do this. And I think it could be a swift move in the right direction. People looking for traditional Catholic churches that do not hold to this nonsense. But I don't know. Let's comment on that real quick, and we'll get back to Amoris Laetitia. I don't know, Mario, if you have any thoughts on that.
Amoris Laetitia. Well, it's
on the comment real quick. We'll get to Amoris Laetitia after you comment on what I was just saying. Sorry.
I think that it would be a catastrophe if they get a Benedict XVII, because then it's going to be back to 2005, and we're going to have to go through the whole thing all over again of it's the restoration of tradition, and look, they're trying to turn it around and all that. And then the problem last time was that people were ignoring all the facts that didn't fit that narrative. even though the red flags were everywhere, they wanted, of course, not everybody, but those that were wedded to that narrative, they wanted to believe that. And so they started, they were spinning, like Christopher Ferrara in particular was always spinning the great Benedict, the great restorer of tradition. That was his narrative, and whatever didn't fit had to be made to fit, or ignored, or dismissed, or downplayed, or whatever. But there were just too many pointers that showed this is not what you think it is. This is still modern. For example, just like some Morum Pontificum, right? They always would talk about, the Pope freed the Mass and stuff. And you look at the document, and it says right in there that it's meant to coexist with the Novus Ordo, and that it's how did he put it? This one of the same Roman rite and stuff like that. And he was in no wise calling into question Vatican II or anything. It was simply giving the traditionalists more freedom in the modernist cathedral. That's all it ever was.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation, Mario. I had the thought too. I want to see Bergoglio on steroids be the next guy, because Francis was a great gift to a lot of people. He opened a lot of eyes, including my own. I was very late to the dance with the Benedict XVI. It was towards the end of his pontificate I started to see some of the veneer coming off. But then Francis showed up and opened my eyes quite a bit. And I think that person who might be Benedict XVII, possibly the one that so many so-called traditionalists are rooting for, is Cardinal Sarah. Mm-hmm. So, and there's, posts all over X already, please God, Cardinal Sarah, we need to storm heaven. And I'm all for praying for a good outcome. But I do think some of the commentators cross the line a little bit to give the impression that we get the Pope we deserve. And if we pray hard enough, if we fast hard enough, we're going to get a real Pope. That's not the way the church works. Is it really? I mean, we're the sheep looking for shepherds. We're not sheep looking to, select a shepherd. That's not how that works. So, I mean, yeah, pray and fast by all means, but pray and fast that you're prepared for what's coming. I think.
Well, I would like to, at some point, maybe in the coming weeks or before the conclave, I suppose it'd be nice to maybe get one or both of you or anybody else who's interested to talk about these potential candidates, because I think, again, it's really important for people to understand that this is not just a Francis problem, which, again, I think that's what a lot of people think. It's just like, once he's gone, everything's going to be rainbow and sunshine and flowers. And no, again, it's all stems
rainbow, maybe, but yeah.
That's true. Yeah. But no, it is one of those things that it goes back, guys. This goes way back, and there's so many different issues. And again, I can't recommend enough. Anyone who's watching this, who's still on the edge, go check out those two websites, novusorderwatch.com and akacatholic.com. That's what Louis does. Louis started up his YouTube channel again, or you've been producing a little bit more. I shouldn't say started it up.
I'm diving back in. Nice. I had the great Mario Derksen on recently on the podcast. Yeah, you remember that, right?
I do. Mario too.
Like, a couple weeks ago. I'm talking to Mario. I just wondered.
Wait, what was the topic?
We talked about all of the wisdom flowing forth in our day from the chair of Peter Kwasniewski.
That's right. Yes.
So this idea that the church is without a spiritual leader is not exactly true. They haven't seen the X account of Peter Kwasniewski, because look, he's got enough authority to question Pope Pius X. So really, in this interregnum period, we're okay. We're in good hands.
Logic is a frightful thing. It leads you to conclusions sometimes where you don't want to go. And
it's a great point. Yeah, it is.
Logic forced him, right? He's got false principles, and so then logic forced him to criticize St. Pius X and essentially condemn some of his teaching as a historical embarrassment.
He called him a liturgical modernist.
And that as well, yes, that's right. His decision to revise the breviary the way he did exemplified liturgical modernism, Kwasniewski said. You'd think that maybe St. Pius X knew a little bit about modernism also.
A little bit.
Yeah, but once you go down that road, that's the whole danger of recognize and resist, right? Exactly. Once you can say, well, I don't have to listen to this pope or this one or this one or this one, then
right.
Why listen to any of them? I mean, shoot.
But you would have thought that maybe that will just give them a clue that says, okay, well, maybe I'm wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But no, then St. Pius X was wrong.
So let's say we have a miracle and a Catholic pope, rises to the chair of Peter and begins cleaning up the mess. And we'll know pretty fast, right? I mean, a good father finds out his children are toying with potentially fatal drugs. Does he hem and haw for 10 days, 2 weeks to figure out how to attack it? No, he jumps right on it. If we get a real pope, he's going to immediately have to address the problem that is Vatican Council II and the liturgy that sprang forth from it immediately. So there's not going to be some waiting period to figure out, give him 6 months to a year to figure out where he's coming from. We'll know. But if we get a real pope, we're going to see the fruits of this resist the pope movement starting to flower in front of us. And it's going to be this thing where even though we have a real pope now who's truly cleaning up the mess and trying to restore order and bring the true church back into the light of day, the resist the pope crowd's going to be resistant because that's what they've been trained to do. They've been trained to think like Protestants. When they look at the pope and the things that he teaches, well, we got to run them through our own filter to make sure it measures with what I think is true and what I think is the true faith. And there's going to be that period of time where these people are going to have to be slowly converted back to Catholicism. It won't happen overnight for them.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mario.
Imagine if, let's just say there's this, Pius XIII, right? And he starts undoing Vatican II and all these things. Well, then somebody like James Martin could say, using the recognize and resist principles, I'm just going to stick with the previous pope, right? With the prior one. And then because if the magisterium of Pope Gregory the 16th into the 19th century, if I can just choose to follow that now as a recognize and resistor, why can somebody else not say, oh, I choose to follow Francis? Even long after he's gone.
You'd have a church on one corner that says, it's Gregory the 16th Catholic Church, and on the other one it's Pius X Catholic Church. That's an interesting idea. But no, it's exactly true. It's a dangerous road, and again, it's sad too because, as you say, Mario, all logic seems to just kind of go away, and it's so much based on pride, and it's so much based on you're the one who's interpreting what's coming from the Holy See, which is obviously silly. And I think that's something that's so misconstrued about Sede Vacantis, is that people think, well, you think there's no one on the seat, so you must hate the papacy. It's like, obviously that's really the exact opposite. We honor it so greatly that we can understand that there's no way the men, the last 6, have possibly been able to be the Pope. I want to have Father Timothy Geckel jump on here in a few minutes. That'd be great to have his opinions on what happened, his thoughts when he saw that Francis died. But I want to get real quickly to Amoris Laetitia, because we brought that up before. Louis, maybe if you can just describe, not briefly, but tell us what was that? Why is this a big problem? I mean, again, part of the legacy, of course, from Bergoglio is going to be what he did, and that was obviously one of the things he did. So maybe if you could describe that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that'll stand out as probably the most shameful thing that was produced by this fake pontificate, Amoris Laetitia. And that document, 60,000 words, it's loaded with errors, heresies, blasphemies, but I think that the chief blasphemy in the entire text is that portion. I think it's Article 303, if I'm not mistaken, where he says that people in these irregular situations, in other words, in second, third marriages, persisting in adultery, can with a clear conscience come to realize that this is what God is asking of them amidst the concrete realities of their life. In other words, God wills adultery sometimes, which is, how do you possibly defend that? As outrageous as that is, And that, over the test of time, history will end up judging that as being the most blasphemous thing that ever came out of the fake church to that point in time. People are going to look at that and think maybe that's a Bergoglian invention. This is one of his excesses that he owns lock, stock, and barrel. That's not true. I've said it before, and I think on your program, Kevin, the man didn't have an original thought in his head. He wasn't making up anything on the fly. He was simply implementing the council. And so you would ask yourself, well, where did he get from the council the idea that God wills that we break the sixth commandment? That's outrageous. Well, I would point you to the Declaration on Religious Liberty of Vatican II, because it says that we have this right that can be derived from the divinely inspired word in sacred scripture. We can see it, that just based on our human dignity, we have this right to participate in false religions, which is what? It's breaking the first commandment. So if God can will, everything that we have that's a genuine right comes from God, of course. So if he can will that we can, in fact, worship in a false religion and break the first commandment, why not the sixth? So everything that this man did, from the mundane and the easily overlooked to the truly blasphemous and stunning, like Amoris Laetitia, all of it is founded in the council. All of it.
Mario, any comments?
Yeah, I would like to add that I think Amoris Laetitia was, especially that paragraph with God might will an adulterous relationship, that was really just the warm-up to his more profound and more wide-ranging apostasy when he declared that God wills different religions, a diversity of religions, right? Because then that's directly about the first commandment, and it is not only is it contrary to divine revelation, it is contrary to reason. So in other words, you don't even have to be a Catholic to have a problem with that. You just have to be reasonable to have a problem with that. And I don't know if if this is the time to talk about it, but I know, some people will always come up and say, no, you're misrepresenting it. He didn't mean that God wills the diversity of religions, that only that God tolerates a diversity of religions. That was not his active will, but only his passive will. But that is not at all a possible interpretation of what he said. And I've argued that before, and I would be happy to explain it again if need be.
Well, he made that clear in that meeting that he had with young people. I forget what country he was in, where he said all religions are a pathway to God. Mm-hmm. I mean, so he clarified. Of course, that's exactly what he meant, Mario.
Yeah, and that's also how he acted, right? How he interacted with the false religions. I do not call a single instance in which he ever even hinted at the importance of conversion to Christ in front of a non-Catholic, a non-Christian audience.
Did Benedict XVI ever do that? Or John Paul II? I don't think so. Paul VI? I'm not sure that any of the conciliar claimants actually called anyone to conversion to the true faith.
John Paul II, I think, well, I hate to speak unprepared. So on that one, I'm just going to be quiet right now. But we
should learn to do that
at some point. But I think I've read some things from John Paul II before where I'm thinking, man, back in the 80s or whatever, that sounded almost Catholic compared to what we get nowadays. It really has moved along quite far.
But then he was also the model of false ecumenism, right? Look at Assisi, going and just saying, hey, let's all get together and sing Kumbaya together. And I mean, that's, as Louis said, it's kind of in action. You don't have to give a public declaration. You don't have to say it ex cathedra. When you do it, by your actions will reveal obviously what you believe. All right, I'm going to bring in Father Timothy Geckel. Good to have a priest in a discussion of this sort. Father Geckel, thank you very much for coming on. And Father, I asked the other gentlemen what they first thought when they saw the news that Bergoglio had died. So I'll ask you the same question. What was your first reaction?
Well, first, thanks for the invite and pleasure to be joined with these two gentlemen. Thank you.
Pleasure to see you, Father.
Thank you.
Yes, Louis, I've never got to meet you. I've listened to you a lot, and Mario, I met you when I was a seminarian. So I don't know if I've seen him
okay.
since in Lebanon there.
Father
Yeah.
had more hair back
That's right. Yes.
I definitely had more hair. Yes. More hair, bigger head, less wisdom. Yes. But no, your question. My first thoughts. I don't know. It's kind of a mixed bag because on the one hand, I was raised with the samurai, and I've never known anything but. I've never had to sort my way through any of the Novus Ordo or Vatican II stuff because I was always taught with just what the Catholic Church taught before Vatican II, so it was always consistent and everything. So on the one hand, I pay about as much attention to it as I do to an Anglican bishop dying or a Muslim imam dying, because if it's not the Catholic Church, it doesn't have a whole lot of bearing. But on the other hand, there's so many people that are trying to live the Catholic faith, trying to be Catholic, and this affects so many of them. So it's I don't know. I was mentioning to somebody, it's kind of interesting timing. Easter Monday, right after Easter takes place, and I don't know what that means. If this was, it's obviously God's will, one way or another, permissive will or whatever. But I don't know. I don't know what it signals. I hope it's a signal that more people would be clear to the confusion of looking at Rome and the Vatican and seeing that as Catholic. Because with Bergoglio, it was so clear that he was not Catholic. I mean, people that were not Catholic, the people that are Protestants or people that are atheists are like, well, how can this guy be Catholic? It's just a logical
Vladimir Putin, right?
conclusion.
Vladimir Putin said something about that, didn't he? Say like, how could he doesn't even seem Christian. I forget the exact quote.
Joe
but I remember
Rogan said that on that interview with Mel Gibson. Joe Rogan. Yeah, it's interesting because I've had a lot of conversations.
But it goes to what Mario
of course,
said, right?
What's that?
It's sense. There's so many things that have happened go against even just common reason.
Yeah, but it's just interesting because in my time down here,
I think I talked over you. I've got a bit of a lag here. Oh boy.
Yeah, I think yes.
Over you again, Father. Sorry about that, Father. Father, I'll let you talk. I'm sorry. We're like 2 seconds behind. I'm not trying to interrupt you. I promise. Father, I wonder to your opinion. I don't think you follow probably too much of the Novus Ordo politics. Certainly not like Mario and Louis. But what is your gut feeling? Do you think it's going to be the next Pope? Is it going to be conservative or another Francis 2.0?
I highly doubt it's going to be conservative. I don't know the numbers, but I'm sure Louis and Mario know. How many of those cardinals did Francis appoint?
I saw 80%.
I mean, the overwhelming majority, correct?
I'll look it up real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, if the post I saw today is accurate, it's 108 out of the 135 electors.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So overwhelming majority of them were appointed by Francis, who has no interest in anything traditional. I mean, we're the little mushrooms popping up here, right? That's the best thing he had to say about Sedeficantis and everything. Anybody, you could have somebody openly promoting the gay lifestyle or some other thing that is so contrary to divine law, and they get promoted. I mean, they're put in the Vatican and praised and everything, but somebody that wants to do a Latin Mass or some conservative group of religious nuns or brothers, they get shut down. So do you think that Francis is going to appoint anybody in that College of Cardinals that are in any way conservative or traditional? I don't think so. So I mean, I don't think that Ratzinger before him, probably did a whole lot better, but I don't know. So my just simple take on it is I think it's going to be more Francis and maybe even double down. That's what I think is going to happen.
Do you think that happens, Father? Do you think that there will be a shift towards, say, like your parishes of the CMRI and other groups that stick to tradition? Do you think that the semi-trads, the recognized resistors are going to just say, enough, we're not doing this again, we're not doing this for another papacy, and they'll jump ship, so to say? And you think you're going to see more of that? That's my kind of hope. I mean, I don't really see it being a conservative either. You see a lot of Twitter right now, it's going to be this. Yeah, not likely. And I think it's more likely it's going to be Francis 2.0. But I find that hopeful. I find that to be a likely shift in the right direction, that people are going to say, okay, no more.
Honestly, I don't know. But honestly, I think it might just create more divisions, more breaks in this group or that group, because I mean, you've had to be a part of the Novus Ordo religion, or to be a part of the R&R, you have to kind of ignore Catholic theology and Catholic teaching and the teachings of the Pope before. You have to either completely ignore the Pope and say he doesn't matter, we're just doing our own thing, or you have to say we have to stand up against him and do our own thing. So, I mean, I've heard from people that know priests, quote unquote priests in the Fraternity of St. Peter, that say if they shut down, if the bishop shuts down our Latin Mass, or if the Pope shuts down our Latin Mass, we're going to go off by ourselves. That's just going to lead to more division. It doesn't affect the SSPX, I don't think. I don't know, but they're just going to keep going, recognizing and resisting. That's not going to change anything there. They're not going to go elect their own Pope. They're not going to do anything like that. I think there will be some people, but I don't know if they went, if they made it through Francis. How much less Catholic does a Pope need to be for you to finally?
I guess, Father, I always think it's like, but they always thought, okay, he's going to die. I mean, he's old, he can't last that long. Eventually he'll die, and then hope. And that's kind of my thought, that at least some people have it. They're like, okay, and then there's a possibility. And then if that possibility, if they elect Tagle, and it's like, oh my goodness, this could last 40 years of a fruitcake. And then it's like, I think you're going to have, I really do think, I think your church is going to be flooded. I feel really optimistic about this. I think that's really possible. And it's another thing for the viewers out there. I think this is the time we need to be really promoting State of A content. I know it's kind of, I don't really like that word. Nobody really does, but it's the word we use for the groups. Promote this material, share sermons, share websites, cmri.org, sgg.org. What is the Bishop Sanborn's one? Roman Catholic
Institute.
What's the website? I don't know. Anyways, I don't want to misquote their website and send you to the Feniites or something. But anyway, go to these websites and share them. Make sure everyone knows about them, because right now, once this election happens, I'm telling you, people are going to, if it's not a conservative, they're going to be thinking, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? So we need to make sure that information is out there. So really, really be on that. I think we all need to be on it. Podcasters as well. Of course, Louis, Mario, I know you guys will be doing good work. But everyone watching, I think it's really important. Flood social media, flood it with good material, flood it with novusordowatch.com, flood it with akacatholic.com, cmri.org, etc. It's really, really going to be an important time. Father, if you want to stick around, this is an interesting point that I think Mario tweeted about, not this exact point, but about the SSPX. I think this is an interesting thought. SSPX will get their new bishops from the Vatican. It's controlled opposition. But the point being, is this the time when the SSPX will go and consecrate new bishops during this interregnum? And Mario, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Somebody brought it to my attention that might happen. Somebody outside the Society of St. Pius X. It was just a thought. Wouldn't that be clever on their part to consecrate bishops while they don't have a pope? So, of course, they're not going to have a papal mandate, but then maybe they could argue, well, there was no pope. Of course, it'd be totally silly, because then people would just say, well, what, you couldn't wait a few more days? But they don't know who's going to succeed Francis, and the next one might not be so conciliatory towards them as Francis was, somewhat ironically, right? He was very nice to the SSPX. I don't know what's going on with what their thoughts are in the SSPX leadership. Do they maybe not care anymore? Do they still want to have some kind of a deal with Rome? I don't know what they're thinking these days. So they might just not care and say, well, it doesn't matter. We'll consecrate bishops when we're ready, and with or without Rome's approval. On the other hand, if they're I would imagine that they'll want to at least not unnecessarily scandalize their own people, or make it difficult for them as far as justifying their new bishop. So I would imagine they're going to look for a solution that will work they're going to try to work with Rome rather than simply ignoring Rome. But at the end of the day, I don't know.
Louis, any thoughts? Or Father, go ahead, Father.
I'm sorry. I was jump in a quick question. What's the point of the SSPX if they're not there to resist the Pope? I mean, what's the point of their group? What interest would they have then in existing or continuing on their work if they're? I mean, and again, this means no disrespect to anyone that whatever, but it's just what is the point of the organization?
I think they would say the training of real priests and the preaching of the gospel, the sanctification of the faithful. Mm-hmm. Right. But
I believe like individual just, and this is just such a small limited knowledge of my own and experience, but just not the priests maybe on an individual level or on a lower level, but as far as the higher ups making the big calls, I mean, it just seems like there's such a convolution of a purpose and what they're doing and the steps that they take. I don't know. Sorry, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here.
No, it's a good point, Father. I think I'd find myself oftentimes really with much better understanding of someone who is truly in the Novus Ordo than the SSPX. Like I'm just kind of like, what? You know, what are you doing exactly? And so I see what you're saying. I think it is that their whole position is kind of strange, and that was kind of my point earlier. It's like you kind of make your own churches, right? Oh, we're the church of this, and we're the church of SSPX. It's like, well, but you're Catholic, right? So I mean, do you follow the Pope? So it is a very tricky situation that they've made for themselves. They've made themselves a really bad bed, and they're going to have to sleep in it, or as you say, Father, or what, or what are they going to do? And it's a really interesting point. And I mean, I again, that's why I wonder if again it's a Tagle or someone that big things are going to happen. I'm really pretty convinced of it. Now, is it going to be from the head of SSPX? I don't know, but I think people are going to be moving around. Louis, what do you think?
I don't think we're going to see that from the SSPX by any scenario. I don't care how bad the next guy is. They're not going to pull that trigger and say that man's not Catholic. He's not a Pope. I think Mario's description of what they would say their purpose is spot on. The problem is the leadership. My interaction with the leadership, it's been a few years, but my takeaway was that they convinced themselves that the best way to form traditional priests and sanctify the faithful, etc., is best done. It's like a prudent decision they've made, not to poke the sedevacantists bear, not to focus too much on the anti-Catholic part of this man who claims to be Pope, but rather to just stay the course. And it gets more and more preposterous because this is what happens when your number one goal isn't to seek and to teach the truth. That's not their number one goal. It's not. I was present in the church the day that Bishop Fillet said in 2014 about Bergoglio, what we have before us is a genuine modernist. And then we all walked out of there saying he's the Pope. How do you can't equate these two things.
But what do you do with that kind of accusation? My goodness.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and from there, then he quickly started to fade into the background and moved away from being superior general. And I'm wondering if he just he said a little bit too much too soon. But I think they're just so dedicated to building the franchise. Truth is not number one there. It's not, because I think these people, they're too well formed it would be an insult to them to say that they don't realize that Jorge Bergoglio is not a Catholic. We all recognize it. Joe Rogan recognizes it, like Father said. They recognize it. They're just unwilling to, proclaim it, which is it's bad business. If truth isn't your number one goal, you're going to end up looking like a fool.
Well, and they look I think foolish. That the problem is perhaps bigger, and that is they think a non-Catholic can be Pope.
God forbid. Yeah, maybe they do, Mario. But
yeah.
Well, I mean, how many quotes from the popes and from canon law and from the saints and moral theologians do you have to ignore to believe that? I mean, that's pretty scary. I mean, I know a seminarian who was kicked out of a SSPX seminary because he had a pre-Vatican II theology book that had the line in there about a pope loses their office when they're manifest heretic. It was a Catholic theology book from before Vatican II. It was used in seminaries and stuff like that. They found out he had it. They kicked him out. It's like that's.
But scary. The problem is that Bergoglio is not just a non-Catholic privately, but his magisterium is anti-Catholic, right? And that's really the problem. All these disputations among the theologians hundreds of years ago with St. Robert Bellarmine and Cardinal Cajetan and so on, they were about the Pope as a private person. What happens if he privately becomes a heretic? Nobody thought it possible that the Pope could teach heresy or other dangerous error in his magisterial documents, because that's why they're not talking about it, I suppose, because nobody thought it possible, and because it isn't, right? And it's now we're in a situation in which a false Pope can obviously teach whatever he wants, and that's what we're looking at. And oftentimes people will fall into the error of just making it about, is Francis personally a Catholic? Certainly not, if the term Catholic has any meaning. But what's even worse is that his non-Catholic positions he teaches in his magisterium, or he taught in his magisterium, right? And tried to impose on other people. That's why, if his magisterium were Orthodox, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? It will be of secondary concern if he privately believes any of it. But as long as he's not teaching it, as long as he's not teaching his errors, then there wouldn't really be this great problem. It'd be a different problem. And as far as I can tell, he still couldn't be Pope if he's a heretic privately. But what raises this to a whole different level is if he spreads his errors in his magisterium. That's really the problem with Francis, and of course also with Benedict.
But of course, Mario, that's where you have to read it and interpret it in the light of tradition.
Yeah,
I've heard this from people. It blew my mind. It blows my mind hearing it in real time with people. I mean, you see somebody write it on online. It's like, okay, whatever. But when you're having a conversation with somebody and you're showing them the quotes from the church and the teaching of the church, and then you show them the Vatican II documents and you say, read these lines. How can that be Catholic? Oh, well, it's not for me to point out whether something from the church is Catholic or not Catholic. It's for me to read what the church wrote here and understand it in a Catholic way. It's like, well, can you hear yourself? Who does that make you then? I mean, if the teachings of the church require an interpreter, then there's no point to the church. I mean, that's why we need the church to interpret scripture for us, because every Protestant denomination interprets scripture to their own destruction, as St. Peter's, as the Bible says. If the same is done with the teaching, has to be done with the teachings of the church, then it's as good of a guide as just the written word of the Bible left uninterpreted. I mean, everybody then needs the Holy Ghost to guide them to teach infallibly and to understand things infallibly. It's just such that the night and day difference between Catholic teaching and the teachings of the Vatican II Church. It needs an interpreter to change things around to make it fit.
Yeah, and where the church, where there is need for additional clarification, the church can render it, and the church has rendered it in many cases. And the problem is, so the individual who says, "Well, I have to understand Vatican II in line with tradition," I would say, no, you have to understand Vatican II the way your prelates in charge understand it, because that is going to be the authentic understanding of the council. Not you spinning it to make it work with what came before. That's just your interpretation. You need to follow.
Well, the problem is,
look at the Novus Ordo Magisterium, right? That's your interpretation of the council, not what somebody like Father Brian Harrison might think about what the council means. Not if that's not the official interpretation.
Well, and the problem is, the official interpretation is that everything out of Vatican II is consonant with tradition. That's what they're feeding their faithful. And so this is a great example of how clever Satan is, because he's taken this very good thing that we have, this childlike trust in our spiritual leaders, our pastors, our sacred pastors, and twisted it. So now you have people that genuinely want to be Catholic, and they're looking to Rome to see what to make of Vatican Council II, and they're being told over and over and over again that it's just this one tradition of the church. It was a gift of the Holy Ghost, and this is what it means. And this is how you interpret religious liberty in line with Catholic tradition, and so they follow. They're supposed to follow. They just don't know who their leaders are anymore. But it's a masterstroke of diabolical genius, what Satan accomplished in Vatican II.
Well, and I think that go ahead, Father.
It's I mean, the root of all sin is pride, and so don't you dare be prideful. Of course, we want to be humble, but it's not humble to go against the teachings of the church, obviously. But that's, as you said, that's the trick. That's the mind game. It's like, oh, if I go against what Pope Francis says or what my bishop says, then I'm being prideful and arrogant, and who am I? And I mean, that's just such a trick. Yeah, such a nasty trick to deceive people. But I lost the second point I was going to make there, but. Go ahead, Kevin.
No, but yeah, no, it's really fascinating that I just lost my train of thought too. Thanks to the comment section. Sorry, guys. I had a really good one, and then Father lost.
It's harder than it looks, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm trying to. I have a thought. I'm trying to lead the conversation. Then I catch a good comment. I'm like, oh, there it goes. Poof. There goes the whole train of thought. This is an interesting one. It's kind of a little off topic. What we were just talking about. I'm personally hoping for the new Pope to have a St. Paul type moment after his election. I mean, complete with getting struck blind for 3 days. And I mean, I think, of course, we all hope for that. I mean, I think it's really probably a topic for another day, the whole idea of how could we get a true Pope. I mean, we all know that we can, again, have a true Pope, of course. I mean, that is absolutely assured. How it can happen, I think there are plenty of different ideas out there, but I think it's going to take a miracle no matter what, right? I mean, no matter what the scenario, it's going to take a miracle. God is going to have to intervene in some way, and yeah, maybe it is a St. Paul moment. So I appreciate it, and I think it's something that I really think that we need to stay positive. And I know that that's hard in these times, and I know maybe it is the end times, maybe it's the end of the world, but I think that that's something that we really want to do, especially on this podcast, is try to show how beautiful the faith is. So it's not just always how bad everything has gotten and how terrible Bergoglio was, etc., but also how wonderful the actual Catholic Church is. And so I'm going to shamelessly plug good friends of mine right now. I hope you gentlemen don't mind, Father. We're going to run a short commercial. So if you guys have to cough or get a drink of water, I'm going to run a commercial for people who are Catholic doers or trying to provide absolutely excellent content that will actually help.
Only God knows the good that can come about by reading one good Catholic book. At Glorious Heritage Books, we reformat and republish cherished Catholic titles from before the Second Vatican Council. Take advantage of these pious works brought back to life. Visit gloriousheritagebooks.com and explore this ever-growing selection from our glorious Catholic heritage.
And don't forget our free cartoons and Catholic educational supplements, including our 162-topic animated Catholic history.
Oh boy. I hope that ran better for you all than it did for me.
Looked good on my end.
It froze a bit for me. It was good on your end. Perfect. It was just on my end. But go check them out. They're really wonderful people and really do wonderful work. So definitely go and buy your Catholic books over at gloriousheritagebooks.com. Well, I guess where do we want to continue? I think maybe something that I think is really important again is that we're talking about obviously Bergoglio, but I think it's important to again really, really pound on that fact that it was not just him, that it comes from Vatican II. Now, I guess I heard a sermon by Father Dominic Radecki, I think it was, who gave a brief description of the heresies of Vatican II, which was modernism, indifferentism, collegiality, and ecumenism. I don't know if there are more, but those are the ones that I think he mentioned. Now, Louis, maybe I'll start with you. I mean, what exactly was the issue, I guess, with these? What was this? What was Vatican II? Why is Vatican II the problem and not just Jorge Bergoglio for the nonsense he spews?
Well, one of the things that Bergoglio is going to be known for is being so blatant about the idea that God wills the false religions and that all religions are a path to God. And that is the message. That's one of the core messages of Vatican II. It's not just ecumenism. So in the document on ecumenism, they talk about how the communities of the heretics and the schismatics, they don't call them that specifically, but that's who they're addressing, that the Spirit of Christ uses them as means of salvation. Well, if that's true, then no reason to be Catholic. No salvation outside the church. They gave that doctrine lip service, but then they totally blew it away with those commentaries. But then it gets even worse. You go to a Nostra Aetate, where it's the declaration on the church's relationship with the non-Christian religions, and they're treating the Jews as if they're one with us in the cross of Christ. And I'm not talking about the Jews of our Lord's time who had, followed Christ. I'm talking about the Jews of our time, which is what Nostra Aetate means in Latin, our time. They're addressing the Jews of our time and saying they're one with us in the cross of Christ. They say that the Buddhists have a path to enlightenment. They've essentially laid it out where any religion's as good as the other. And in fact, based on the Declaration on Religious Freedom, we all have the right to practice whatever religion we happen to think is true. So, I think that is the very heart of the Second Vatican Council, and it occupied a central place in the Bergoglian reign of terror.
Mario, any comments on Vatican II and its issues? I mean, we could talk for hours about the errors of it, but
I was just going to draw attention to something, to a good illustration of how things have changed with Vatican II and since Vatican II in the set of statues known as the church and the synagogue, Ecclesia et Synagoga. Are you familiar with that at all? I'm a little rusty on the background, like exactly where this set of statues was, when it was first made, or where it first appeared. But I sent you a link. Are you able to pull this up? This is to a little Ordo Watch post from 2021. There you go. The church and the synagogue before and after Vatican II. So if you could just hold it right there for a moment and look at that picture, you have, I think these two statues were seen, would typically be seen like at a cathedral. I don't know if it's only one cathedral in the world, or if it was just, I'm assuming it was a common thing for cathedrals and maybe other important churches to feature that. On the left, you see the church, right? It's a woman representing the church, the bride of Christ. You see her in a sort of triumphant position with the cross and the crown and the chalice. And then on the right, you see the synagogue as it is after Christ established the church. So this is the apostate synagogue. And you see that she is blindfolded and she is carrying the 10 Commandments, but holding them kind of low, as if it's no longer recognizing these. It's still holding them in her hand. She's still holding them in her hand, but she doesn't really understand what they're about. And so you see how the church is like looking at the synagogue in this position of triumph over the synagogue. And so that was you could say that was that is the Catholic position on today's Judaism, on apostate Judaism. And what they did after Vatican II is somebody came up with a redo of this. And that is very telling. So, of course, they didn't want to display that anymore, the church triumphing over the synagogue. Now they decided, we're going to make the church and the synagogue kind of be like sisters that are both learning from each other. Okay? So scroll down and you will see, here's the full picture of these two. And then you will see, look at this, the church and the synagogue. Look.
Wow.
Mutual, what do they call that? Mutual enrichment, right?
The two covenants side by side.
They're like, oh, the church says, teach me something about the law. And the synagogue says, oh my goodness, look at the Gospels. And, and they lived happily ever after. So for all those that think Vatican II changed nothing, here's a very good illustration of how things change. And notice that that's exactly how the Vatican has been acting since. This isn't like my interpretation of Vatican II. This is how the Vatican II Church has been acting towards Judaism. And if you'd like to, maybe later we can talk about that faux pas a few years back of Francis with the Jews, where they essentially caught him teaching I almost want to say accidentally teaching the superiority of the new covenant over the old covenant, and they called him to account for that. Because they noticed, well, wait a minute, how come he's teaching in his catechesis, he's teaching that the new covenant is superior to the old or replaces the old or whatever, right? And when we meet with him, he tells us everything's fine. Well, what's going on here? And that was quite an episode, yes.
Textbook modernism right there. Say
right.
one thing to one group of people and then the opposite to another group of people.
Yes. Yeah. So the Jewish authorities were not pleased when they caught on that Francis speaking out of both sides of his mouth. And how is it that was possible? Well, it was quite simply, Francis was addressing a group of Novus Ordos, right? It was the Wednesday audience. So the Novus Ordos get to hear the gospel or Francis' version of the gospel. But then when he talks to unbelievers, like Jews, for example, he will tell them a different gospel. And so the only ones who get to hear that, for example, that Christ is necessary for salvation is always those who already believe in Christ. He never told that to people who don't believe in him. On the contrary, he went out of his way to reassure them that they are fine just where they are and the way they are.
Well, didn't he say to not proselytize, right? Wasn't that like a direct quote? It's like, don't you dare.
He said it's solemn nonsense.
Yeah. It's like, just common sense. It's like, wait, what? So your religion that you believe to be true, maybe you shouldn't try to convince others that it's true, because again, as Louis said, it's all good. It's all ecumenical. Everyone's going to heaven. So why try to convert them to just kind of a better path? It's so silly. I mean, it's like, I guess that's what Father, how you must run across this. I mean, how is it just people? Is it cognitive dissonance? Is it just, closing that shutter over their eyes? Because when we talk about this, I'm a cradle Sede too. So I haven't experienced this either, but what is it that stops people from seeing that it's nonsense? And that what Francis preached for years is it's silly. It can't be Catholic.
Well, I would say two things. For one, so many of them are not taught what the Catholic Church actually teaches. They're not taught the catechism. I've had people that went to Catholic, Novus Ordo school or Novus Ordo college and thought that they knew what the Catholic real faith is, and they're so very misled and ignorant of so many things. So it's not just, I think Bishop Perunas would say this sometimes, it's not just what the Vatican II clergy are saying, it's what they're not saying. They're not teaching Catholicism. They're teaching a new religion, and there's so much ignorance of what the true faith actually is. And secondly, I would say, I think there's this false virtue that is promoted and preached in practice. There's a false humility and a false charity that is so much endorsed that it would be prideful to call out heresy in someone else because you think you're better than them or you think you're whatever, rather than recognizing, no, it is humility to accept what God has revealed to us and what the church has consistently taught for almost 2,000 years. And it would be pride to then say, well, I'm not going to stand up for what Christ taught, and I'm going to accept some watered down version because who am I? Who am I? And then the false charity is we have to be nice to everybody and we don't want to be mean to them, and we have to accept them as they are and accept what this good priest and that good bishop says, even if they're saying hell doesn't exist and everybody's going to heaven and the Jewish covenant is just as good as the covenant of the new law. Well, don't be mean to them. Be nice, be charitable. And it's this perversion of what true virtue is, true humility, true faith, true charity. There's all, the devil doesn't counterfeit. St. Louis de Montfort says that in True Devotion. The devil doesn't counterfeit pennies. He counterfeits gold. He takes what is really valuable and he counterfeits it and twists it. deceive people, because like I said, humility and charity, I think those things get twisted and morphed, and it confuses people.
Louis, I'm going to ask you the same question because you obviously did have that journey. But everyone, please like, share, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. Wherever you're watching, we're streaming to a bunch of different places. Go check out novusorderwatch.com, aka Catholic.com, cmri.org, I suppose. Father, I don't know if you have any other websites or anything to shout out. No, cmri.org. Go check that out. Louis, so you're obviously a very intelligent man. Tooting your horn for you. You seem like it, at least. We'll say mildly intelligent then. And it took you a long time to figure this out. So again, I'm just saying it's silly, but obviously you're not a dummy. So it's not something so when I say it's silly, maybe it's silly of me to say that. Obviously, it's a hard thing for people to get past. So I guess maybe if you could just briefly say how was that for you? And then what was it that was like, you said it was kind of at the end of Benedict, or you're kind of like, okay, wait a second. So how could you not see through this, I suppose?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that's perplexed me for a long time, because I know plenty of people, clergy, other laypersons, who are way more intelligent than I am, holier than I will probably ever be, and yet they can't see. And so a large component of this is God's grace. And I'm not saying that is a diversion from answering your question. I think it really is that. I mean, God gives grace as he wills. And so when I was out there promoting Vatican Council II and defending it and speaking in parishes and dioceses around the country, talking about how Vatican Council II is just what John Paul II said. I think that the confusion part, not to repeat what I said earlier, but I live this illustration of what I think is Satan's diabolical brilliance. He took that filial trust I had in the person that I truly believe was the Holy Father, John Paul II, and then after him, Benedict XVI, and the things they said about the council. I treated those men as if they were my rule of faith, which was what a Catholic's supposed to do with the Pope. And then as for what opened my eyes, I'm going to call it grace, but it's just constantly looking for the truth. And I have to say, God put that desire to find the truth, whatever it was, in my heart, and I did it, and I followed it. But then there's a next step that's every bit as important. It's one thing to find the truth, to seek it and to find it, but then you got to do something with it. And I think there's a lot of people in traditional Catholic media. I don't want to name names because it's not my job to judge anyone's internal disposition. However, I think there's a lot of people that do what we do, who seek the truth, find it, and then they refuse to do something with it. And the something is to get out there and repeat it, like we just talked about the society, St. Pius X. I cannot believe for a minute that those men really believe that Bergoglio was a true pope. I don't believe that. I think they've convinced themselves that, they're doing a service to the people, and that, well, I can't speak out because therefore I won't be able to do this. That's not what God asks of us, really. I mean, he asks us just to find the truth and to speak it. So I can see how it's possible that people can look at this situation and not know, because in their naivete, they're treating these fake popes as if they really are the rule of faith, and they're not. But then you have other men like, and I'm going to name a name just because Mario and I just talked about, Peter Kwasniewski, who looks at the guy, says, yeah, that's the Pope. That's the guy that's supposed to be my rule of faith, but I know a little bit better. In fact, I know better than Pope St. Pius X. I know better than all of them. So anyway, I think it's a big spiritual component to this. And so even though I get very impatient with the people that can't see, we need to be patient and pray that they would receive the grace to be able to see through the fog.
And I love what you say about truth. Searching for the truth. I think that's really so true. And I think that's what anyone watching this who again is struggling with that. That's got to be the number one thing, right? If you're here watching this, I'm sure maybe you're just curious to see what Mario would have to say about Bergoglio. But you're also likely looking, really really desiring truth. And I think that I guess Father, maybe I'd ask you that. I mean, what's the best way for people then to actually find the truth? So, you can listen to us, but we're just a bunch of guys, and of course, Father, a priest on here talking about it. So, and I'm sure, Louis, I'm sure that you go back and you read some of the church documents. I mean, Father, what would you suggest for someone right now, watching this show and they're like, hey, yeah, I do want truth. I do. So what should they do?
Yeah. Well, I would recommend, obviously prayer is so important, of course. I mean, praying the rosary every day is so important. Prayer, of course, but I recommend, Mario and Louis have done so much good work in showing the difference between Catholic theology and the Vatican II theology. When you put the teachings of the true popes side by side with the teachings of the false popes, if you look at what's taught before Vatican II and what was taught after Vatican II, it's a night and day difference. There's a contradiction. There can't be a contradiction in the papacy because it's one voice that the Pope speaks with, the voice of Christ. The Holy Ghost guides him. The Holy Ghost can't contradict himself. The church can't teach error. If the church has condemned something as being against divine revelation, against God's law, it can't then change that tune and then say, oh, it's okay now. And that's exactly what has happened. So I think the biggest thing is to look side by side, or at least invest some time in looking at what the church taught before Vatican II. That's so very important because so much there's so much commentary and speculation about, well, this is how we should interpret this, or this is how we should take that. And that when you read Catholic teaching before Vatican II, it's clear, and you can clearly see the contradiction between the two. I think that's, to me, that seems to have been the most effective way of helping people kind of realize the difference.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Mario, any comments on that? Or Louis? Mario first.
I just, as both Louis and Father were talking about this, I thought to myself, what a shame that almost every single prelate that ever criticized Francis in the Vatican II church is somebody who was either retired or not actually in charge of a diocese. And the only exception was Bishop Joseph Strickland in Texas. He was the only diocesan ordinary who was willing, who he had something to, well, I want to be careful. I want to say all the others had nothing to lose, but I thought it was interesting that all the ones that always get, make the news, right? Whether it be Bishop Schneider, Athanasius Schneider, right? He's an auxiliary bishop. Some people have mistakenly referred to him as archbishop. He's not even in charge of a diocese. Okay, he's just the helper bishop, the one that confirms and just helps out with ordination, whatever, right? He's an auxiliary bishop. Then one in the Netherlands, Robert Mutzerts, he's an auxiliary. Then there was Bishop, let's see. Well, a number of retired bishops and cardinals, right? And I find that interesting. And I guess it is just fallen human nature. And I don't want to, make it look like I would be the big exception or anything. But I guess when people, they're not, most people, I guess, will not speak out unless they are comfortable, unless they have extremely little to lose in terms of personal repercussions, And I think that is part of it also. As soon as you're retired, everything's cool. You can't really lose your job or your pension or whatever. Then suddenly they're happy to speak out, it seems. And many aren't, still not. But I've noticed that almost all of the of Francis's critics that were prelates in the new church, they're all either retired or not in charge of a diocese, with the exception of Strickland.
And I would wonder, because I talked about this on the Traditionalists, so the political channel, kind of about how like Germany, how they just will not change because they're just afraid. They're literally afraid to make changes, especially the baby boomers. They just even though they know there's a big problem, they'll do the same thing over and over. And I think a lot of it, from what I see living over here, is they're cowards. They're just a bunch of cowards. They're just afraid to actually make any step that's not with the norm. And I think about that. It sounds like a lot like what's going on now, as you say, Mario, they're afraid. They're afraid to lose what they have. I think that's a lot with commentators as well. But then you also see it happened in England in the 1500s. Like the exact same thing. You had one bishop, or was it two? I mean, St. John Fisher was the one that comes to mind, at least, who was like, nope, not going to do it. Go ahead, kill me. You know, I'm not going to do it. They all went with it. So it's like, as you say, Mario, maybe it's just following human nature. Maybe it's not uncommon. Maybe it is just how we are, and it takes a saintly person to be able to withstand it, which is a interesting thought.
It is no question. It is very difficult when that moment comes and you must decide. Most people will defect, no matter if they were good Catholics before. Most people will defect. That's also very sobering for all of us. You know, always to remember. You know, the grace of God is necessary. Always do two things, right? Distrust yourself and hope and trust in God. And pray for that grace to be faithful, because chances are you won't be. So like statistically, you won't be. So unless the grace of God carries you and you're open and receptive to that grace, most likely, otherwise you're going to fail.
I think though, but don't we believe as Catholics that faced with actual martyrdom, that God will give us the grace to persevere in that moment? The grace is there. It's not like we can't do it without the grace, but so it's not like you reject, you know, you reject Christ.
Maybe Father could weigh in on that.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say, Father, about that.
Well, I mean, for one thing, I mean, God never puts us in a situation that he won't provide the grace, unless we put ourselves in a situation that is, you know, occasion a sin or something like that, then it's on us. But yes, God will always give the necessary grace, but you also have to ask for it. I mean, you have to pray for it. You have not because you ask not, right? Ask and you shall receive. And I think, you know, I don't know, but I think maybe a lot of people, it's just human nature. All of us are sure we're right. I mean, of course we're right. I mean, we're always right. I mean, we can't be wrong. And to even pray, many people don't think to pray to know the truth, just because we think we all have it. And, you know, the process of conversion for anyone is not it's not an easy thing, and it goes by degrees, and it takes time, and it takes prayer, and it takes effort, and it takes self-denial. But as far as like you're saying with like martyrdom or something, I mean, there were many that were like, you know, go back to the Roman martyrdoms, you know, Roman martyrs and Roman persecutions. There were those who apostatized. They were given the grace, they rejected it. And I think a lot of that comes down to how we live our life. I mean, if we are just kind of trying to be as much of a part of the world as we can be, and not really live to serve, to love and serve God, we're setting ourselves skating by the skin of our teeth. But when push comes to shove, we will fail. I once had somebody used to come to church, in a place where I used to be. I was a priest at the time. And he was having some struggles, and this is not anything like confessional or anything like that, but he was just saying, it's just so hard. I just wish that I just wish that God would let me just be a martyr right now. It'd be so much easier to just die, and then I can go right to heaven, rather than having to go to church every Sunday and say our prayers every day and do this and do that. And I'm like, gosh, I mean, it's kind of a little presumptuous for you to say that, for one thing, and it'd be easier if we just could die for our faith and go right to heaven. Well, the guy doesn't come to church anymore. The guy doesn't come to the sacraments anymore. And it's like, if you want the easy way out, then Christianity is not for you. And I think that's what you have to be willing to, not love father, mother, brother, sister more than Christ. And I think that human element comes in here a lot about, seeking your comfort and seeking what's easier, rather than delving deeper to see if you're wrong and to find the truth. So,
and kind of on that topic, there was a great sermon. Someone in the chat, if you could look this up for me, that'd be great. By Father Carlos Cepeda, who I wanted to have on the show as well. Unfortunately, couldn't join because he's traveling. But he had Catholic Wire. If someone could look that up on YouTube, it's one of his more recent videos. He said it's titled the most important sermon I could give, and it's about prayer, and it's absolutely excellent. And just since we have a big audience right now, I couldn't recommend it enough. Someone in the chat, find that for me if you would. It really will change how you view everything. I think it's a 15-minute sermon, but it's very, very important. Just literally about how we should pray and how most people don't do it right. And really, really, really fascinating. And I think it could change your life. And I think that's another, again, kind of getting back to that action part of this whole thing. There are so many good sermons and stuff out there, guys. We appreciate videos like this. A lot of people watch because it's interesting. Everyone loves Mario. Everyone loves Louis. But in the end,
hey, how come I got left out there? No,
well, not everyone loves Father. Father, I
totally joking.
I didn't want to give you your head's already big enough, Father.
This is true. This is true.
I don't know if people didn't know you were going to be on, Father. That's my excuse.
I'm totally joking. Totally joking.
But really, though, there's so many good sermons out there. I mean, anyone who ever watches sermons from Bishop McGuire, Bishop Sanborn, Father Zepeda, they're almost every single one of them is really wonderful. So again, go out and find these sermons and build your own spiritual life. Find a good chapel, move your family there, leave your work, find something else as long as you have a good Catholic parish, because I think that will absolutely change your lives as well. Trying to live by yourself is really hard. So if you can, find a good parish. I want to go back to Bergoglio. We've kind of sidetracked for a while here. Mario, I guess I'll go back to you on this. I mean, I don't even really know what to, where to put it. But I mean, what are some of the other crazy things from Bergoglio? What I think we need to again remember this as he just died. Today we talked about a few of them. We talked about Amoris Laetitia. We talked about a few of the other crazy things. But since this is really pretty much your job, has been for the last 13 years, is all of the crazy things that he has said, which has kept you busy full time practically.
Yeah.
What are some of the other ones that maybe people have forgotten?
Oh my, where to start? Well, I have probably forgotten them too. Something that always that I seem to remember easily is his I think somewhat off the cuff comment. So this wasn't like in some document or anything, but he was speaking, I think it was to seminarians of the Diocese of Rome, or maybe priests of the Diocese of Rome, and he mentioned that that if there is no Catholic Mass available where you are in a particular situation, and you need to go to Mass because it's Sunday, well, you could just go to the Anglican Church then. If there's an Anglican Church, I mean, that is so bad. Obviously, okay. First of all, it's a false religion. Okay. Secondly, it's not even a Mass. Okay, it's the Anglican worship service, Eucharistic worship service or whatever, but the Anglicans don't even have valid orders. Okay, so it's going to be a heretical bread and wine service. That's what Bergoglio thought you could go to that instead of the Novus Ordo. Well, I guess instead of the Novus Ordo, it is kind of equivalent, but of course not from the conservative Novus Ordo perspective. So I mean, that is such a no, that is so blatant, that is so bad. I don't care that you're a Jesuit. There is no excuse for that kind of a position, right? Another thing was also in that kind of a setting with, I think it was priests of the Diocese of Rome. He indicated that he thought that first of all, a lot of marriages he thought are invalid on account of ignorance about indissolubility. In other words, people are not aware, they don't know that marriage is for life and that it is indissoluble. And therefore, the marriages a lot of them are not valid. Now, I'm not entirely sure on the Father Geckle could, I'm sure, speak to that specifically, and I'd have to review my own post on the matter. but that's not how it works. Is it right, Father?
Didn't he say something about nobody nowadays really understands what forever means? Didn't he say something like that?
Means, yeah, that sounds like something he said. But although I don't think I got that quote anywhere, but I think I've heard that before. That sounds like something he would say. Yeah.
It's like, come on.
I mean, that was insane. And then in conjunction with that, on the flip side, he said he thought that a lot of people that cohabit, in other words, they're not married to each other, but they're living together as though they were married. He said that a lot of those people have real marriages because that is manifested in their fidelity to each other. Okay,
that's like saying that. That's like saying that Satan, because Satan is so determined in opposing God, he's on the right path because his determination and perseverance is to be praised. It's praiseworthy.
There you go. Because well, actually, that sounds very much now like what John Paul II said in 1979. He said that the firm conviction of followers of other religions in their religion is the result of the spirit of truth operating outside the visible confines of the Catholic Church. That's insane.
It's crazy. Here's another one from eCatholic 2 in the comment section. Quote, there are no damn souls. The souls who are bad immolate themselves, so to speak. They just go dark. I remember that one too.
That brought a couple converts to my church when he came out with that. They started coming. That was like the straw that broke their back. Like they were kind of in the fence and then saying that hell doesn't exist and then souls are, disappear.
Yeah. And so this was, remember that story came out, as did a few other whoppers that came out in La Repubblica, that left-wing Italian newspaper, with Eugenio Scalfari, who died a few years ago, a former Catholic. He became an atheist, so a genuine apostate, who kept visiting Francis in the Casa Santa Marta, right? It was off schedule, off the record. It was not an official Vatican visit. That was one of the things Francis introduced, the humble Francis introduced. He decided to just invite some people just straight to his residence personally without going through the regular Vatican channels. Normally, you can't just go in and say, oh, I want to see the Pope. And they'll say, yeah, sure, get in line, buddy. You'd have to go through the Vatican, I don't know, the apostolic household or something. But for some people, he basically gave him a phone call privately and said, hey, why don't you come over to the Casa Santa Marta where I live, Saturday at 5 p.m. I'll see you there. And Eugenio Scalfari, the journalist for La Repubblica, and he was already well into his 80s, if not in his 90s already. And so he would conduct interviews with Jorge Bergoglio, at which Bergoglio reportedly said such things as hell does not exist, or there is no hell, there is only the disappearance of sinful souls. In other words, hell, instead of going to hell for all eternity, the reprobate souls would instead simply be annihilated. Right? It would be killed, essentially, wiped out of existence. And then, so when a whopper like that came, well, then it was later said, well, but Scalfari, he's already in his 80s or 90s, and he doesn't take notes during those interviews, and he's reconstructing this from memory. We really don't know if Francis actually said that, and we shouldn't think that he said that. Now, you might say, okay, well, maybe that sort of thing happens once, but Francis kept re-inviting the guy for more and more interviews, and every time it was the same story. And I think this was a tactic Francis enjoyed. He would throw out, I think, these completely outrageous whoppers, and then have this teeny tiny bit of plausible deniability, which of course all his apologists quickly seized, or they quickly jumped on that and say, well, the Vatican said we can't say that that's a faithful reconstruction. We just don't know. And yet that is, it's not even enough for the Vatican to say, we don't know if Francis said that, or let's not consider it something that Francis said. you have to totally repudiate this. I mean, we're talking about really blatant heresy. You can't just, that's like, I don't know. It's like if somebody, accuses somebody else of whatever, grand larceny. If he only says, you don't know for sure that I did that, what kind of a response is that? Right? It'd have to be a very clear and firm, no, of course I didn't do this.
I can tell you, if I said something like that from a sermon, I would remember it, and everybody would tell me.
Exactly. No, it's just crazy, and it's just crazy how the Pope splainers will let them get away with it. That's what just boggles my mind. And again, like you said, Mario, it's just he could just do this kind of stuff all the time. He does it over and over, and everyone's just like, "Oh no, shh, nah." And it's like, come on, one time, okay, maybe, but come on, he keeps doing it over and over. The one that gets me, I know Father just got to go. We're gonna get last words from Father here in a sec. The one that always gets, I always remember, is that Luther is one of us. I put that up on the screen a bit ago about how they were all saying, Martin Luther is one. I just couldn't believe that. Here in Germany, we went into a modern church just to see the hideousness of it, and they have a huge bust of Martin Luther. And what's ironic, as we all know on social media, is how all the Novus Ordites call Sedevacantists Protestants.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah. Good for us then, I guess, if your Pope says we're on the right path. So yoo-hoo. Father, it's been a pleasure having you on. We really appreciate it. As always, everyone. Father does do a regular or has been doing a regular show over on the Traditionalists, which is fantastic. He's had some really good shows. One about IVF was very good. What was your last one, Father, that was really good? What was your last video you did? Do you remember?
On Americanism.
It's already been a couple of weeks. Yeah. Americanism, right? Yeah, very informative, clear church teaching, and really good stuff. So everyone who has not already subscribed to the Traditionalists, it's like the Catholic Family Podcast, but more politics, cultural stuff. We are going to try to do daily shows and live shows, etc. It's kind of a work in progress. We're all very busy. But there's some really good material. So if you haven't already seen it, go over there and check it out. Father, before you leave, do you have any last words?
Yeah, I'll just start with kind of funny story. I wanted to jump in with Mario was talking about this. I had some people over here that were interested in coming to my mass and church and wanting to know more. And I explained things to some of them, and then other people got involved. And then the Novus Ordo priest found out. And so we went and told them all, and then told everybody from the pulpit, you can't go to his church because it's a danger to your soul. And then this one fellow went and talked to him and said, he had a long conversation with him, and then he was like, so you're saying it's okay for me to go to an Anglican church? And the Novus Ordo priest, yeah, that's fine, go ahead. I can go to like a Lutheran church? Sure, that's fine. And he kept, I can go to, like, could I go to a mosque? Yeah, that's fine, but I can't go to over here. No, that's a danger to your soul. It's not a valid mass, it's not a valid priest, and all this stuff. It's like, everything's fine except for sticking to the Sedevacantist position, which says clearly, we do this because of the papacy, not in spite of it. We're trying to just follow what the church has always taught. And if it was true then, it has to be true now. From the Vatican II church, you get modernism in so many different forms, and all of that has already been condemned by the church. It's not our authority that we condemn these things. We're just calling the spade a spade, and the popes have already said that's wrong. So I got to go here. Got to go do some marriage prep with some people. But thanks for having me on, and pleasure to do this with Louis and Mario. It's really, really nice to do this with you. Kevin, we talk all the time, but Louis and Mario, is great to spend time.
Thank you very much, Father.
Nice meeting you, Father.
Yes, you as well. God bless you.
Always a pleasure. As Father leaves, we might be joined by another guest here in a few minutes. One of the guys from WM Review, also friends of the podcast and very smart fellows. We'll get their opinions on this as well. I'm trying to see if I can connect them up with a link. But Louis, maybe I'll go to you with that same question I was asking Mario. And again, we've talked about quite a few of the things that he said, and I'll get to Amoris Laetitia. What is something that sticks out for you, or that you remember that we haven't already mentioned?
I think the Pachamama thing will definitely be remembered for a long, long time. I mean, that's just a blatant idolatrous service right there in the Vatican Gardens. History will not soon forget that event. We did talk about Amoris Laetitia quite a bit, and what I think is the biggest blasphemy in that text, this idea that God occasionally wills adultery. But there's another blasphemy in there that's a very close second, if not a tied for first place, and that's this idea that those who persist in adultery can sometimes come to the conclusion that this is, the best response that can be given to God amidst the concrete circumstances of one's life. Essentially, what he's doing there is he's turning the tables on our Lord's condemnation of the Pharisees for heaping just undoable burdens upon the people. And now in this text, he's essentially pointing at God and accusing him of the same, as if the divine law is just too difficult for some of us to keep. So he's essentially accusing God of being unjust in a papal text. I mean, it's mind-blowing. So, I think once we get off of this podcast, within minutes, every one of us is going to say, oh, I forgot this one thing.
Yeah.
Because there's been so many of them. Like Mario said, he's probably forgotten more of them than he can remember because there've been so many.
Oh, yeah. Francis, I mean, he said, for example, that the Catholic Church has been caught in flagrant adultery. It's funny. He condemns adultery. It is so much has happened over the last 12 years and change. And it seemed to be getting worse and worse. Thankfully, then in 2020, when this whole alleged pandemic came, at least he stopped preaching every day. Remember that he used to preach every single day. There was a sermon, and then the Vatican would report on it. And it wasn't, the whole sermon wasn't really, because it was just like stream of consciousness kind of stuff. That what he'd say at his daily Eucharistic worship service. And that stopped in 2020. And so that, at least in that sense, that kind of slowed a little bit, but then things slowed down a little bit. But then, I mean, he was going at full throttle for most of his 12 plus years. And it was hard to keep up with everything. And I did what I could, but of course, realizing that by no means did I catch even remotely everything that was to catch. You just, there's just, at some point, you just like, yeah, whatever, I guess he said it again. Or in fact, remember, well, I don't even care to bring this up really, because it's so sordid, but remember that every so often he would come up with that C word, that expression that refers to, I don't even want to say it.
I know exactly what you're going to say, Mario. Go ahead.
Right? It was usually when he's talking to the press and he says, okay, well, the big problem nowadays is we have this whatever phagia, and you look it up and like, I've never heard this word before, and like, it refers to the consuming of XYZ, and thinking, wait a minute, he just used that word, and not just once, but again and again. And just imagine like children coming home from school saying, Mommy, what's this? This word. And they're like, where did you hear that? Oh, we were just in religion class, or we were reading the news about Pope Francis. I mean, it's so disgusting. These are practices from like the let's call it the LGBTQXYZ underworld. So, but he just used the terms like, no big deal.
Mario, I'm going to guess that a decent number of the people watching this haven't been able to connect the dots of what you're saying. I'll say what he said. I think I remember the word. But like you said, when he first said it, I was like, what is that? Nobody knew that word. I had to go look it up. Yes. I think it was cropophagia. Anyway, what it means is eating excrement.
I think, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is what it means. And he accused the media of engaging in this.
Yes. So he was using it metaphorically, which like, really? You couldn't think of a different metaphor? You couldn't just say what you meant. You could have just said scandalous stories, for example. That's what it meant, right? You guys you're engaging in, what was it, muckraking, or essentially you're getting high on scandal. Right? Isn't that what he was trying to say? The
Well,
news
you know,
media is making too much.
Yeah,
it's dealing
exactly.
in scandalous stories.
Right. So in order to point that out, he used a word that is truly scandalous. Coming out of your neighbor. It's a scandalous thing to say, coming out of the guy that's pretending.
Yeah, there were two words that were used. The one you mentioned, and I'm trying to remember the other one now. Well, these are words that shouldn't be in anybody's vocabulary.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
I mean,
except, a priest should be familiar with them just because he needs to be with anything having to do with morality and the most outrageous of things. But
it kind of goes back to his reputation, right? Again, in the dictator pope, that these are things that I think that's kind of who he was. I know we're kind of throwing dirt on him, but I mean, yeah, I think he was. And again, you got glimpses of that every now and then, like with this. He was, typically pretty la la la, but you remember what was the one with the altar boy who had his hands folded and he comes and just like I can't even believe that kind of thing. Like I get he's the modernist pope, but that kind of stuff is wild to me. It's like how do you get away with that and even just keep the popular appreciation or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, and if people who are wondering like what in the world we're talking about, you can find all these stories on the Novus Ordo Watch website. I just sent you the link, Kevin. Maybe you can pull this up real quick. It's novusordowatch.org/Francis. Okay, that's the what I
pull up on the screen or send a link.
It is a very, very long list of all kinds of heresies, blasphemies, impieties, scandals, idiocies, whatever Francis has done that I covered or that other people covered and that I linked there. And did we lose you, Kevin? Louis, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay,
Kevin's a little bit frozen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
And
I tried to do something on my computer and it freezes. I think I got it though.
Well, and I think it does kind of give the lie to this whole. Well, maybe I don't know if that's a good example now, but in general, this whole thing about the humble Francis, one of the characteristics of genuine humility is you try not to stand out, right? You go with, well, I don't want to say you go with the flow. It depends on how you interpret that. But what I mean is, so for example, they pointed out, oh, look, he's so humble. He's paying his own hotel bill. Okay. That was a typical moment where, like, no, a humble person would have discreetly had that done without drawing attention to the fact that he's paying the bill, right? There's like a humble man who gives alms will not let the left hand know what the right hand is doing, instead of sounding the trumpet and letting everybody know you're giving alms, right? And so I think we saw that a lot with Francis. This what could be understood as humility, but when you're really looking at it, like Louis, I think you're the one who invented or coined the term humble cam.
Mm-hmm.
It was always cam, right? The camera was always there somehow. So he did plenty of things that a humble man would not do or would not flaunt doing. And for example, this thing about him going to confession, I always thought this was, odd. Obviously, any real pope, will go to confession, but he's not going to do it with the camera rolling.
Right. And that was at a time, if you recall, where, well, as far as I know, from the moment he walked out on the balcony in 2013, he never genuflected at the altar when he celebrated the Novus Ordo. And yet but he had a bad knee. But when it came to that photo op of him going to confession in St. Peter's, while, the tourists were watching in awe, he dropped to his knees. And then he dropped to his knees every Holy Thursday to wash the feet of Muslims.
For the immigrants. Yeah.
Right. So when the camera's rolling.
Yeah, exactly. And he couldn't, well, even when the cameras were rolling, he would go to, what was it? It was always the Maria Maggiore, I think. I don't know, one of the big churches, and he'd always sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and that just always blew my mind. It's like,
couldn't kneel.
Look at, I mean, just a picture behind me of Saint Pope Pius XII. You know, he looked pious. I think he was a pious man. He was a pope. I mean, you know, he's kneeling, he's praying. He looks like he's actually trying to talk to God. Boy, have we ever seen that with Bergoglio? Oof. I don't know. Is it, as Mario said, I don't know his inner what's going on there, but boy, he didn't show it externally. I'm going to bring on SD Wright of the WM Review. Let's see if he may just be audio. Yep, I think he's not going to show up on the screen. Do you hear us, Mr. Wright?
Hello. Yes, can you hear me?
I hear you.
Yeah, my
lovely
face,
British.
my
love
face
the British.
isn't for cameras, I'm afraid. Yeah.
No worries. Well, it's good to have you on. It doesn't show up on screen, so I'm going to throw it up there. WMReview.com.
Oh no, it's .org now.
Is it org now?
Actually, it was never .com. It was .co.uk before, but now it's WMReview.org. Yeah.
So I have a really bad memory. I can't even remember what it used to be. WMReview.org. Really fantastic material. You guys have been pumping out a lot of stuff lately too, which is really good. And another great website to watch as we head into the conclave, etc. I know that you guys just recently had one about the kind of what you think might happen, who it might be. I might ask you that next, but what is your, as I've asked everyone, when you saw the news of this, what was your first reaction? What did you first think?
My first reaction was, is it true? Is it fake? Because I remember when Bishop Williamson died a few weeks ago, that was prematurely announced on quite a few channels actually. But yeah, turned out to be legit. And yeah, well, it was a bit of a surprise. I had sort of planned this week to be going into a kind of jousting over hair baptisms. I thought probably that would be how this week would go. But that's probably going to be forgotten now, and so that's what it is. But yeah, well, here we are, Conclave 25.
Conclave 25. Yeah, it's going to be a lot going on. And as I've said before, I hope to do another podcast about the potential candidates and why they're all still a problem. This is not going to be solved after Francis, no matter what. Potentially a bigger problem if it's a conservative. So I'll ask you, what do you think do you think it's going to be a conservative, or much more likely it'll be one of the Francis cronies?
Well, we were talking about that before, weren't we? This morning. But before we get into that, I mean, I think we should. I don't think any of us here hold to the Kasakiakan thesis, but I think we should just pause and acknowledge that, as far as some of our friends on that kind of department would hold, there is a way this would resolve out of this conclave, isn't there? And they have their particular understanding of how that would work. And I think I'd be interested to know what the rest of you think. I mean, I would share some of the ideas, possibly in the sense that if on the outside chance they elected a man who was a Catholic, who wouldn't have the impediment of heresy and so on, then that would be one thing out of the way. And then if he then proceeded to abrogate Vatican II, say, for example, I mean, we're talking fantasy football here, right? But you know, if this occurred, then and if the whole world basically considered him to be Pope, then I think there would be a reasonably strong argument for applying some of the things that the theologians have said about peaceful and universal adherence to him, healing his election in the root, such that we might end up with an actual Pope again. I mean, that's not what the Kasakiakan thesis people think. They would understand it differently, and I acknowledge that what I've just said is very unlikely, to put it mildly. But I'd be interested to know whether any of you guys do you three absolutely think there's no Pope coming out of this conclave, or what do you think?
Mario, you want to answer first?
I don't see how a Pope could come out of that conclave, but
well, I suppose what I'm saying is he wouldn't come out of the conclave, but the man would come out such that if certain things followed, if he was a Catholic to begin with, which, you know, if it was one of the cardinals, then that's not looking very likely.
Yeah, I think that is so unlikely to happen that I'm content to say we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I see what you're saying, though. I've considered that. Say if they just kind of randomly elect Vigano, or Bishop Vigano, I should say, who I think he is a validly consecrated bishop, as far as we understand. Again, it would be a miracle. That's kind of the St. Paul miracle type of a thing that someone mentioned earlier. But it would be an interesting scenario. I mean, in my mind, I would certainly watch it. We had a bit of this talk on Twitter earlier with some of the guys, and it certainly would be intriguing. I mean, I would be watching with bated breath, and I would certainly be seeing what my bishops are doing, the true traditional bishops, and what their thoughts are. I don't know, Louis, what would you think?
Could I just jump in before Louis does? I'll just say,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
agree with Mario that it would not be the conclave that would make him pope. If you see what I mean, it would essentially be the peaceful and universal adherence of the church, if such occurred, to a man who had no impediments to being the pope. That's what would make him pope. So yeah, over to Louis.
Yeah, on that note of peaceful acceptance and universal acceptance of the Pope, one of the things that's part of that is this man acting as Pope.
Yeah.
As he's acting as Pope, he is universally and peacefully accepted. So acting as Pope means the other part of what Sean just said, and that is, abrogating Vatican II, addressing the problem that is the Novus Ordo right out of the gate. We're going to know immediately if the miracle has happened. It's not going to take a lot of time. You'll know right away. A good father is going to walk into the house and set things straight for the good of his children. He's not going to waste time. So I think as far as look, we know this conclave is going to gather. Those men were going to, unless something happens drastic, something miraculous, their intent is going to be to elect a man to continue the conciliar revolution. That's what they're going to choose. Right. So if there's going to be a miracle, we don't know any of the details about how this thing can unfold. Perhaps there's going to be that great St. Paul moment amongst the 180 cardinal electors. It's maybe a mass kind of a miraculous event to change their hearts and minds so that they elect a man to bring the church out of the shadows and into the light of the day again, But as far as the likelihood goes, I think we all agree the likelihood is very small. Yeah. At the same time, though, I would counterbalance that comment by saying in 1945, if you approached any faithful Catholic and described the situation in the church in 2025 to them, they say there's absolutely no possible way that could happen. And they'd have a lot of good reason to say that God would not allow that. So maybe we need to be a little bit cautious about predicting the future because we really don't know, So maybe there's that little glimmer, Who knows?
Yes.
And what do you think? Do you think? Yeah, and Sean, do you think it's going to be? It's also not likely. I imagine you would also, if you are a betting man, which I imagine you probably could bet on that in Vegas. I'm not going to even. Sorry, I shouldn't even consider that.
DraftKings, I'm sure you can get.
You can bet on everything, right? But what would you think? You think it's probably going to be a liberal, or do you have a candidate in mind?
No, I don't have a candidate in mind. It could go any way at all, couldn't it? And as I said to you this morning when we were talking about a particular man, I said, if I don't come on this, don't make me look like a naive idiot, because we all know that the people who go in, there's that saying, isn't there? People who go in papabile come out not the Pope, right? That's the saying that people have. However, I have heard from sources that are interesting, should we say, that Cardinal Jean-Marc Avelin, who has just been elected the bishop of the Bishops' Conference, the president of the Bishops' Conference in France, he was apparently Francis's favourite, and the intel, whatever, is that people in the Vatican are saying he will be the Pope. Now, obviously, it would take a lot of salt with that. But anyway, as a result of that, I've been looking into some of his theology or pseudo theology, and that's been pretty wild, really. He's got a kind of veneer of some level of conservatism or of a veneer of orthodoxy, but it's Vatican II orthodoxy, right? So it's like John Paul II kind of level, but I mean, he's definitely a Francis man. He's been appointed by Francis. He was Francis's favourite. I think his theology is kind of like the theoretical scaffolding for the stuff for the actions we've seen Francis doing. So a lot of it's based around interreligious dialogue and so on. But who knows? Who knows?
Interesting. Now, again, we're going to have to talk again later because I want to do another show maybe this week about potential candidates. I think that would be good to do a bit of a deep dive into, because again, we see so much right now on X, on Twitter, that people are so hopeful. I'm sure you've all seen the chart. I should have pulled this up. Maybe someone in the comments can send it to me. This chart of the conservative and liberal cardinals, and they've got something like, what is it, 75% in the red conservative, and it's so silly, and it's just like, who are they considering conservative? That's the question. But who is the one? Is it Cardinal Mueller? It's Cardinal Mueller, right? Here in Germany, who don't they have him on like the farthest right now? Mario, you got to tell me. He denies, we talked about this on the show before. He has some really bizarre beliefs. Like he denies the true presence, or what was it? Do you remember?
Yeah. Well, so he denies transubstantiation, and he denies the bodily resurrection of Christ, and he denies the perpetual virginity as defined, if I remember correctly. Okay. So of course, now, if you were to ask him, do you deny the real presence? He would say no, right? Because he has some concept of the real presence. But I mean, I don't know if we want to get into this now, but I'd be happy to read it to you. I translated, portions of his work regarding the real presence into English, because it's only available in German, and you hear a lot, but you certainly don't hear transubstantiation in there. In those words, it is so bad, and it is so this typical modernist gobbledygook, where in the end you have no idea what he actually said or what it means. But
isn't that what so many of them are? That's just, I think that's so important that we need to discuss. It's not just Francis, guys. These conservative cardinals they're missing chunks of actual Catholic, like the basic Catholic fundamental doctrine.
Yes.
We're not going to solve this with Cardinal Burke and Cardinal Sarah.
Yes. The dogma is transubstantiation. It's not simply the real presence. It's very specifically transubstantiation. There's one Jesuit, I think it was, well, no, I'm not sure, so I won't say the name in case I get it wrong, but there's one Jesuit who published, I think the title of his post was, in any case, the message was, I don't believe in transubstantiation, but I do believe in the real presence. Well, excuse me, the Council of Trent says that if you don't admit transubstantiation, let him be anathema. So now if I'm not mistaken, I've seen Mueller, Cardinal Gerhard Ludwig Mueller, affirm transubstantiation somewhere, but it's not taught in his books, at least not the ones I've seen. So it could very well be that it's a typical tactic of, I'm going to affirm it over here, I'm going to say something that denies it over there, and then we'll watch the chaos. That's, I think, how Francis operated a lot. He wanted to kind of sit back and watch the chaos unfold. That's the
conciliar way.
Yeah.
Look at the Dignitatis Humanae, the Declaration on Religious Liberty. Paul VI supposedly insisted that they insert this phrase that we leave the traditional doctrine untouched. And then the document proceeds to destroy the traditional doctrine.
Yeah.
It doesn't,
Yeah. How about you iterate the traditional doctrine? Right?
And then people say, it's ambiguous. It's not ambiguous, it's contradictory.
Of course. Right. Guys, if we're talking about likelihoods, just to, we talked about what's very unlikely, the idea that we're going to have a Catholic Pope, right? On the likely side of the coin, the St. Gallen Mafia, it succeeded in producing Francis at a time when the false Pope on the supposed throne was Benedict, who was not a willing participant in the Mafia's plans, necessarily. So it's very naive to believe that operation, even if the names of the players have changed, that operation of picking the next successor didn't happen, even more aggressively under a Francis who was a willing participant in the shenanigans that led up to the conclave in 2013. So my guess is it's most likely that whoever the successor is has already been chosen. And now it's just a matter of seeing it to the finish line, which isn't a guarantee. But I think the next step is enter into conclave, push it over the finish line, and the candidate that's already been anointed in the minds of the mafia is going to ascend. That's what I think will happen.
The question is what will that candidate be, though, isn't it? I agree 100%, Louis. I'm sure you've already discussed this before I came on, but even if all that's granted, it's just still interesting to think now, like, what will their plan be? Who is their chosen candidate? Is it a conservative? Is it another liberal? Either one carries with it a selection of opportunities for us, and also dangers for people as well, doesn't it? As well as dangers for us, because there's always a chance that along with what I was saying at the beginning of when I came on, there's always a danger that people of our kind of mindset will be deceived. No one's above being deceived, are they?
Yeah, no, it's true. No, it is. It's going to be fascinating, and I think it's going to be a liberal. I think it's going to be a crazy. But if it is a conservative, I guess that's the question. I mean, how much control does the devil have? Because if it is truly a really demonic, then it's always that. It's like the Vatican II. So it's very kind of ambiguous, kind of sneaky. And so then you think it would be a Benedict XVII, right? But if I think that's why I think it's a good thing. I think, in my opinion, if it's Francis II, I think that you're looking at a better shift. You're looking at the devil not so much in control, because I think the devil absolutely would just flip it, like what happened after really. I mean, JP2 did it first, and then you had Benedict. A couple conservatives kind of hide the rot, and I don't know. I hope.
Well, maybe Kevin, a better question would be, if you were the president of the St. Carlo Mafia, who would you have selected, a conservative or a liberal? Because I suppose when we think like who will be elected, we don't know, because we don't. But on the other hand, if we think, hey, if I was them, yeah, definitely. If I was them, I would have a conservative. It would be Benedict XVII, no doubt.
I mean, if you're truly demonic in your aspirations,
yeah,
right, and that's the question, I guess. I mean, are they really just trying to lose as many souls as possible? Or is it trying to sneak across their agendas? Are they humanists? I mean, I don't know. Has anyone studied? I mean, maybe Louis, you brought it up. I mean, what is their agenda? Are they Satanists? I mean, I've wondered that about Francis. I mean, does he really believe he's going to go to some heaven? Does he believe in heaven? What is it that they actually believe?
I think if you had to put a label on them, the conciliar church itself, it's a Judeo-apostasy. And I mean, I could. If they put forward a conservative in appearance, I could see them doing that. But I can't see them elevating a man who's going to deviate from the path that Bergoglio has blazed and push back on any of his initiatives. So when Francis said years ago that the reform of the liturgy that brought us the Novus Ordo is irreversible, he used that word in some context. I don't remember what the venue was. But some guy's going to ascend now to reverse it. I don't see it.
Sorry, real quick. I thought it was pastoral. Isn't it all just a?
It was just a big, nice, friendly conversation.
It doesn't really matter, right? It was just kind of, they got together, said a few things. It didn't actually really do anything for the church. Francis says no.
Well, the problem too is that the terms like conservative are kind of relative, right? There might be conservative Novus Ordo cardinals, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't mean what it meant in 1960, for example. You had conservative cardinals then. But, I mean, it's... Nowadays, if some Novus Ordo prelate, whatever, says, well, I think we shouldn't be welcoming LGBTQ people. Well, that's conservative now. Okay, well,
yeah,
good, but that's very little. He might still be a fan of liberation theology. He might still think the death penalty is evil.
I know. I saw on Twitter. I saw right. Louis mentioned that about Bishop Strickland, about he's this great, really hardcore conservative, and he was in favor of Amoris Laetitia, right?
I think that was your retracted argument, right, those. He made some flowery comments about Amoris Laetitia, and he finally retracted them after being badgered quite a bit by tradition-minded Catholics.
So, fair, good for him then. All right, fair enough.
Yeah. And of course, it's perfectly understandable that as people are coming to know, even somebody in a position like as Strickland, they're as they research these issues, they're learning a lot, and they're going to modify certain positions, and that's fine. But we're just speaking to the objective situation, that there are people being called conservatives just because they're of goodwill, and they're not, they're opposing certain liberal tendencies, but that still doesn't mean that they believe the actual pre-Vatican II Catholic teaching. They may not even know it. Or
at the moment, not being heavy-handed with Traditionis Custodes in your diocese is like a mark of a conservative. Like if you look at Pentin and Montagne's cardinal report, there's a lot of interesting material there, definitely. But you can see that the things are being sort of, yeah, I mean, it's objective in a sense. It's not saying conservative therefore good or whatever, but it is kind of giving weight to certain things, like, I so and so spoke out about the natural law in a way that was kind of correct. Okay, that's a tick in their favor. Well, yeah, okay, but I mean, I think people are just very grateful for, well, Stockholm syndrome, I suppose, isn't it, when we see it.
That's a good way to put it. I think that's a great way to put it. And I think we're going to start wrapping this up. I got to get up early tomorrow. It's 10:30 over here. So it's been fantastic. Again, I want to thank Mario, Louis, John for coming on. Everyone go over, if you don't, you should, I'm sure you guys already know these websites, but I'm going to throw them up on the screen anyway. Louis is over at akacatholic.com. Also AKA Catholic on YouTube, I believe, right, Louis? I think that's right.
Yeah, I think it's, yes. Or it might be under my name.
Is it?
Yeah, I think my YouTube channel is my name.
Okay, so look for Louis Bergoglio on, okay, yeah. So you can then look for Louis Bergoglio on YouTube.
Maybe you should explain for those who are not familiar with it what the AKA means. Also known as,
just because I used to, I would always say traditionalists, also known as Catholics. Because come on, if you're a Catholic, you are by definition traditional. So this is just me being a smart aleck, and I decided to keep it.
I like it though. I like it. Yeah, it's so true. It is really true. We are the true Catholics. WMReview.org. Again, go check that out. This is going to be the time where everyone's going to there's going to be a lot of material. I mean, Mario always has. I don't know how Mario does it. I don't think Mario sleeps.
He doesn't sleep.
But there's always a ton of material. What was that?
Yeah, the man doesn't sleep, obviously. You got that.
Yeah, there's always enough available. I mean, for me to write on.
Someone said that Mario needs to live stream, and then he can do super chats, and you'll get rich, Mario. So do it.
Yeah, no.
All right, everyone. I'm going to give everyone 2 minutes in the comments to ask these gentlemen any questions you might have. And then we'll head off for the night. Again, I hope I've not gotten any confirmations from any of these fellows. If we can do another one about the conclave or after the conclave, I will certainly ask them if they all have time. If they want to do it, we will see. I'll pressure them a little bit here publicly to make them come back on. But I've really enjoyed this. I hope that people have learned something. I hope they've seen the great evils caused by Jorge Bergoglio. I will say a prayer for his soul. I don't want him to go to hell. I don't want anyone to go to hell. But very, very bad evil man. I mean, what more needs to be said? I think we just spent 2 hours discussing how many people he led astray through his errors. Okay, let's see. This is an interesting question because I've seen this come up with the supposed prophecy of Malachi, Saint Malachi, I think. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. What if there is no successor? Because there is that supposed prophecy that says that Francis, what was it, the Roman Pope is the last Pope. I don't know it really well, so don't take my words for that. But I don't know, Louis, if you have any thoughts. I don't know if that's possible, I guess.
So what does he mean by that? No, we will not have a true Pope before the end of time, or no one's elected this conclave. I'm not.
I assume they mean this conclave. That's a good question.
They'll end up producing they'll produce someone.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's any way that they will not produce a man and introduce him to the world as Pope. I don't see that that's at all possible unless the world ends, right? Unless
I think
Christ returns.
These alleged Saint Malachy prophecies are always fun, but apparently they're not even authentic. At least that's disputed. And I think what that commenter is getting at is that so for the longest time, I don't know for how long, but it was always thought that so Saint Malachy or whoever came up with these supposed prophecies had a descriptive name for each pope essentially until the end, right? And it provided a line of from his time onward that these are the popes, and they would have not names but descriptive titles. So it'd be something like ardent fire, right? And apparently that was allegedly Leo the 13th, and then angelic pastor, allegedly Pius the 12th. And so if you assume the Vatican II popes were popes, then Benedict the 16th would have been the glory of the olive. And then there's only one left after him, and that's Peter the Roman. And so people who went with that prophecy and with these that they referred to those popes that I just mentioned and non-popes, said that okay, then Francis must be Peter the Roman because there's only one left, and that's the one after Benedict. And so then they have nobody left, so they're going to be left to say, okay, well then there is going to be no successor,
right?
That's I think
my opinion on all that is everyone be really, really careful with any theories, any Catholic theories, like really any of them. 3 Days of Darkness, all of these things. Talk to a priest about them.
Yeah.
Be really, really careful because most of them are not from the sources you think they're from. The only one is sisterlucytruth.org. Go check that out because that one is certainly interesting and a very, very fascinating theory. Which that one I can support, but really be really careful, guys. I mean, they're, as Mario said, they're really interesting, and most of them have absolutely no basis in truth. There was one. Where was it? Let me see. I'm just going to do a couple more. Just real quick. I'll even answer this one. Why do we care about false conclave? That's why they had the movie this year to program people into scams. Yeah, I think it's just a bizarre movie, and Hollywood is ridiculously stupid and makes stupid movies. I think we care about it because it does matter. And I think that it really could hopefully bring people to the truth. People who have questions about the whole issue are going to be watching shows like this with Mario and Louis. That's what we're trying to spread actual, true Catholic teaching.
I think we shouldn't forget that what happens in the Vatican does affect the world in some way or another. It will affect loved ones, relatives, those who believe whoever gets elected is the Pope. It's not all just about, does it matter to me in my immediate in my immediate surroundings here? Personally, in that sense, like, no, I don't really care who the next false Pope is going to be. But of course, I do care in the sense that whoever it's going to be, it's going to affect people among my relatives who are Novus Ordo, potential converts, and so on. It all does matter. So in other words, we need to look a little bit further than just our immediate selves.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great lesson in general. I think we need to think about it in general about proselytizing. That's a whole nother topic, which I actually plan to talk with a group of priests here in the coming weeks about how we should proselytize and actually how we should try to convert people. It's something that I think we tend to forget about and tend to be pretty comfortable in our little circles at our own parishes and not going ever outside of those groups, myself completely included. And obviously that is not what our faith is about. Gentlemen, it's been absolutely a pleasure. Mario, Louis, I could do this anytime, even to the wee hours of the morning. I do hope to come on here in the next few days to continue this discussion. Maybe not for 2.5 hours. Maybe we could do shorter ones. I know people love to hear your opinions. Again, we greatly appreciate your time, and we hope to see you soon. Everyone in the comment section, thank you all very much for being here. It was certainly an active comment section, which is fantastic. We appreciate all of you, and doing live shows makes it kind of feel more like we're kind of one big family, kind of here having a very important chat. So we appreciate all you guys, and we do say, I know everyone would agree with me. Sorry, Sean's also still here. I keep forgetting your face isn't on the screen. Everyone, pray for a pope. never forget that. Never forget to pray for a true pope. We desperately need that. And that is, again, kind of a requirement of being Catholic, that we must pray for a pope. We need a pope. And who knows? God can work miracles in any way. So, and don't give up hope, guys. I'll leave. If you guys have last sentences, Sean, I'll give it to you. Have any last thing to say before we go?
No, just thanks for having us, and thanks, gents, and definitely echo the thought about praying for a pope.
Awesome, Mario.
Thank you. I'm not going to make any predictions about whom the conclave will elect, but I will say that I'm pretty sure it's not going to be a Jesuit, and it's not going to be an Argentinian.
Sounds good.
I'll jump in. I think.
No, he's back. Kevin first for a moment. All I can say is I'm looking forward to the next one. I will commit to it, provided Sean joins us on camera. So.
Oh, and he just left. Good timing, Sean. Sean just dropped right when Louis said that.
I wanted to hear him react.
Good timing, Louis. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, we'll see. I'll try to pressure him a little bit. I don't know. Okay, I also have a face for the radio, so you can't. No excuses, Sean. Louis, any last words before we go?
No, I think we covered a lot of good ground. I mean, look, none of us really knows what's going to happen. I think the one thing that we need to pray for, in addition to a pope, is for the grace to be able to persevere through whatever lies ahead. These are trying times. Things are moving. Things are changing. We need to stay constant in the faith, and we need grace to do that.
Amen to that. Perfect way to end it. Everyone, please like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that stuff. If you're watching this after it's gone live, we're not going to see all the live stream comments. So comment again. Tell us what you think about it, and tell us how much you absolutely love all three of us. We'll see you guys next time. And until then, God bless you all.